Honestly, one of the ways I first kind of heard about you was seeing extremely far left, the kind of people that have like hammer and sickles in their Twitter names, getting mad, being upset with Vaush. I mean, you've obviously seen that stuff. What is it like to kind of be a pariah among that segment of the left?
I definitely think it's weird. I think a lot of people, especially young people online, get involved in politics these days because they feel very disempowered by the world they live in. They are achingly aware of problems in the world today, but very helpless when it comes to changing anything about those problems. So, in the same way that one might slam the steering wheel to the right to avoid veering to the left, even if it's an overcorrection, I think a lot of people turn to radicalism as an ends rather than as a means,
Right.
believing it's valuable not because it will solve the problem, but because radicalism itself, the act of deviating from center-leaning politics, is the solution. And I don't think that's true. Maybe it's a way of arriving at the solution. Maybe radical frameworks are helpful in finding, achievable goals, but that's not quite the same as the radicalism itself being the solution, because what you get into then is people who aesthetize essentially a lack of nuance. They aesthetize an unwillingness to engage in pragmatism, which is frustrating for me. Oftentimes these people cite, radical leftist theorists, but if you go back and look at what a lot of these theorists wrote on and did, you'll find that a lot of them, by nature of their intelligence and their, worldly concerns, were quite practical people who
Yeah.
wrote extensively, not only on what they would like the world to be, but what they needed to do to achieve it. And some of the stuff Marx or Lenin wrote, was compared to some of the stuff that you'll see on Twitter, quite measured. Um,
Right.
and a lot of people, I mean, they don't actually read this stuff, so I can't expect them to all know that. But it's frustrating. I don't think it's that weird. I guess I hope that I can show people that it's possible to frame radicalism in a way that doesn't require like a sacrifice of practical engagement.
Yeah, I guess the thing I find kind of interesting about it, or just sort of weird about it, is this is a moment in American history where any sort of leftist momentum has like a modicum of presence in our national political conversation. And it's interesting to see how a lot of that stuff has already come down to a lot of, or it has boiled down to a lot of factionalism, a lot of, there's not like already it feels like there isn't as much of a big tent as there needs to be for that momentum to continue to rev up speed. I'm kind of curious if you have any thoughts on that, where how even while a lot of that stuff is a lot of those people are so far from power or wresting power that we're still focused on, or a lot of people are still focused on, Vaush saying something that doesn't totally line up with their morals. Like, why do you think that is kind of broken down that way already?
Yeah, I think the powerlessness can get people to hyperfixate on things that they can change. They can't
Mhm.
change, the American economy or whatever, but they can. I mean, they know they can post something underneath a comment of mine and I'll see it, and that is a
Yeah.
kind of action and reaction that they feel the effect of, at least potentially. I think at this moment in time, our primary consideration as leftists and as liberals, because I know some are watching right now, is impeding fascism. That's the main concern. The right, January 6th, they don't care about democracy. They're undermining the processes that we have to ensure a fair election. That's our first consideration, I think. And what a lot of leftists don't seem to understand is that, first of all, the left can't win with our numbers. We need big numbers. And second of all, if you want those big numbers, what liberals need to be told is that we are the mechanism by which democracy can be saved. Liberal Democrats aren't enough because they may chide and tut-tut and wag their fingers, but they're still permissive of fascist entryism into the government. A fair, reasonable, just democratic government, a proper one, a strong one, would be, say, arresting these Republicans on sedition charges, a charge that I think, by the way, would be very fair given these circumstances, great many of them. And we need to sell that. That is what the left will bring. Liberals will allow fascism to win. We will not. That's what we need to be selling people on. And if you can do that, buddy, you can convince the average liberal Democrat that Joe Biden has been too soft on this threat to our democracy, but we won't be. That is a strong hook right there. But lefties
Sure.
don't see that. They think that liberals are lost causes. Participating in electoral democracy is cringe anyway. And the best we can do is just sort of, get drunk and wait for everything to fall apart, and then just hope socialism arises from the ashes. And I think that is a thoroughly nihilistic and unproductive worldview.
Do you ever feel nihilistic?
No, not really. I try to think of I mean, at the end of the day, we all do our best, right? I know, well, I mean, I don't do my best, don't get me wrong, I still sleep in, but I put in a good effort. I think as long as everyone's putting in a good effort, you can feel good about your life at the end of the day. There are plenty of just movements that never bore fruit until hundreds of years after the deaths of their participants. You know, would we want John Brown, for example, to have died sad because his slave revolt did not bear purchase, did not succeed in ending slavery? Maybe he died then, but what world, you know, did he leave in his wake? How many decades afterwards were his plans brought to fruition, at least in some form? We shouldn't be sad about stuff like that. We have no idea what ripples we leave in our wake.
Yeah, no, I totally get where you come from there. You sort of embrace some fairly common sense, wide consensus liberal opinions, like for instance, that we should be pro-Ukraine, that the Russian invasion is bad. I think a lot of leftists would agree with that, you know, at their core, but like kind of putting that out there publicly, or being against, you know, putting out there publicly their, you know, their support of Ukraine or their disdain for, you know, what happened on January 6th. It just, you know, there's a cringeness to that. There's a liberal cringeness to that kind of stops a lot of left content creators from trumpeting that super loudly. Is there any part of you kind of supporting those things that, you know, might be sort of cringe in the left, but are fairly well, you know, that there are huge parts of like the sort of liberal democratic platform? Do you think that has kind of brought more people to you that are maybe left curious? Is there anything about that to get the left to understand that by being so conscious of not being cringe that you are alienating people in some way? I'm kind of all over the place with this question.
I
But
fully understand what you're saying. Don't worry. No ambiguity at all. I often feel that a lot of people on the left, for them, leftism is the political project of making sure people in their social space know that they're not liberals.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Which is very frustrating to me. Leftism is, after all, a logical extension of liberal Renaissance ethical values. Egalitarianism and freedom are, of course, like principal, values of the French Revolution, of you know, the Enlightenment. And, you know, when Karl Marx critiqued capitalism, critiqued liberalism, he didn't do so as an ultimate refutation of those values, but rather as a condemnation of their hypocrisy, that capitalism fails to economically extrapolate those values out into a proper, economic system. So I run into these situations. It's very frustrating. There are leftists who will agree with what I say, but ask me to tone it down a little bit. And I must say, I don't understand. If you want liberals to get on your side, you know, they have to believe they share something in common with you. What does it look like to the average liberal when Russia wholly unjustifiably invades Ukraine? They turn to the left, and the left is having an honest-to-God internal argument over whether or not this is NATO's fault. A psychotic position unsupported by any of the, you know, the victims of this invasion or of, you know, liberal democracies broadly. But I mean, how do you think that makes us look? With Bernie Sanders and Bernie or Busters, right? Bernie Sanders loses the primaries. We get to be mad about that. Don't get me wrong. I'm happy to. Yeah, that's fine. But then it's Biden or Trump. There is no third option. Abstemiousness is not going to change the nature of our democracy. In fact, given the fact that America has a pretty low federal election voter participation rate, you would think that would be an indication that, if anything, the abstemiousness is benefiting the systems of power that are already in place. But it is two possible outcomes here. You have Trump or Biden. They are very different people with very different political positions. And I think, again, if the liberals see this dichotomy, they turn to the left and see arguing over whether or not having Trump in office is worth the moral sin of tarnishing our leftist identity by voting for a liberal like Biden. These are psychotic debates held by people who have never touched grass and may die without having ever done so. I am loud about the positions that I hold, even when they are uncontroversial and even when they are liberal aligned, because I am right to do so. Because the people who are wrong are often so wrong that their wrongness spills out into broader political discourse and taints the optics of leftists, taints our ability to convince other people. I wish leftists would do this more often. You know, it's not as though other successful leftist movements in the past haven't held on tightly to ideas that were hegemonically acceptable within their societies. Did
Mhm.
Lenin not endorse at times Russian nationalism? Did he not bask in the culture of his people? Of course he did. Obviously. Look at Ho Chi Minh, look at Mao. Were these people all like, yeah, burn down the state, we hate everyone here types? No, they knew how to pick their battles. And they knew that when it came to rounding up, Russian workers or serfs or rice farmers in the Chinese countryside, you need common ideas that play to the interests and well-being of the common people, not this hoity-toity elitist online leftism where real issues that matter to real people are treated as cringe because being correct on them puts you too close in proximity to other people who are also correct but also don't agree with you on everything else. It's just a very, very, very myopic mindset that I have no respect for.
Do any of the mean comments ever get to you, or are you like at this point, you've been doing this for long enough that you've been able to stay level-headed when, some nasty things are written about you on Twitter, or kind of pop into your chat feed, or trickle across the timeline? Like, how do you kind of roll with those punches?
They don't bother me anymore. I get quite a lot of them, and quite a few death threats and other expressions of people displeasure in my existence. But at the end of the day, you do give other people permission to hurt you, or you do not. It sounds simplistic, but I think not of myself, but of the examples set by minority groups. I'm a white cis guy. I'm not straight, but I don't really get any shit for that.
Mhm.
But if I was, say, black in the 1950s, how many people hate me today? Let's say, I don't know, 1 million. It might be more or less. I genuinely don't know. But let's say a million, right? How many people could you fairly say hate you if you were a black person living, in Georgia in 1952? You could reasonably estimate, and this hate has far greater consequence, by the way. My hate comes packaged with a cushy job. That hate doesn't. And they lived. And not only did they live, they were defiant. And I think a lot of them, any minority group who had to deal with that kind of hate, they learned to live not only in spite of the hatred, but also they learn to not care about it in the abstract. Sure, they'll care if they're, harassed directly or whatever. That's, happening right then there. But the abstract of that hatred is it fades away into a kind of a dull half consciousness, background, white noise, literally white noise in that particular example. And don't get me wrong, that's not a good state to live in. It's still horrible to think about that. And of course, I'm not happy that there are people out there who dislike me. But you learn to live in spite of it, and I am uniquely gifted with an opportunity to change the minds of some of the people who hate me. And every email that I get saying, oh, I used to dislike you, but then I saw this and I feel this way now, is worth easily 10,000 of the people who I know dislike me silently and anonymously.
Absolutely.
So yeah, in that respect, I feel, whatever derision I receive is infinitesimal compared to that of like the average black person back in the 50s, and I'm in far better a position to deal with it.
Yeah, and kind of going off that a little bit, I think one thing anyone can glean from this conversation or just your content in generally is you are an optimist in the sense that you think people can be reasoned with. That you can, that with a lot of conversation, if you present a good argument, if you are able to show people the light in a certain way, in a certain refraction, that they may change their viewpoints on things, which is kind of an opinion that's sort of fallen out of vogue, I think, among a lot of leftists. When I talk to my kind of left-leaning friends, a lot of them have kind of abandoned or have given up on the idea that that you can kind of change people's minds about a lot of these issues. I guess I'm just sort of curious, what sort of gives you that faith that kind of across the board that most people are not too far gone?
Yeah, it's not everyone can't have their mind changed, but anyone can. I think as a stochastic project of changing people's minds. My channel has been, at least to my mind, moderately successful. There are people in my community who used to be members of basically every political demographic, from neo-Nazis to anarcho-capitalists to fundamentalist Christian conservatives. And I think, at the end of the day, I never look at a person that I'm arguing with and think of them purely as like an unmovable construct. Usually because when I debate people, they're other public figures, and it's really their audience that I'm trying to win over, right? Like when I talk to Charlie Kirk, Charlie Kirk makes money from his positions. I'm not going to change Charlie Kirk's mind, you know. Maybe his mind could be changed, you know, hypothetically, somehow, but in that debate, that's not my goal. I try to reach his audience, and I can't get all of them, but some of them I think can be gotten. The important part is to never give up hope that it's possible to do that. And because you're not losing anything for it, you know? You can believe simultaneously that it is possible to change the minds of misguided, you know, ill-begotten people, but also believe in any other possible political prescription. To do otherwise is to become essentialist, and essentialism is the enemy of leftist thought. You never, ever, ever want to believe that people are what they are because that's what they are. That fake tautology is a really effective way to dehumanize others in the worst possible way, not as some like pithy little like rhetorical bit, like, oh haha, these animals, you know, but to think of them as non-political agents. You dematerialize them, you know. We're all material factors in a material world, forces that pull and push on each other to produce certain outcomes, some of which seem in retrospect virtually inevitable. But when you reduce a person to some unchanging, you know, unmoving construct, something that can't be affected with political arguments, you dematerialize them. They're no longer a part of the system. They're just bedrock. And this is a faltering political analysis. It makes you weaker. It makes you less able to understand and to predict how people's beliefs change. Especially since so often lefties will only ascribe this immaterialism to people who are very, very, very far right, which is, you know, so they'll believe any liberal could be moved over to being a Nazi given the right conditions, but not the other way around. This is inconsistent political you know, political analysis. And I think it leads to, oh, how should I say? Are you familiar with the Kalergi plan?
I am not.
I believe I have the Kalergi plan. I'm thinking of the right thing. Let me make sure. Yes, yes. No, wait. Kalergi plan, far right conspiracy theory, the Nazi conspiracy theory. That's right. Okay. So after, I believe, World War One, I think World War One, there was a person who wanted to pacify the savage Germans. See, because the Germans, you know, they had World War One kind of pinned on them a little, maybe a little more than was fair. After, you know, so we thought, okay, so we need to pacify them. And the way in which this Kalergi fellow wanted to pacify them was to distill their blood, you know? Have the women have sex with the Italians and the Norwegian people and the French and so on. You know, you have a very complicated political situation, World War One, being distilled into this essentialist understanding of what it was that made Germany a participant. And if essentialism is the level of political analysis you're engaging in, what answers are there but death and eugenics? There aren't, which is why essentialism is a bedrock of every single society that has ever turned towards genocide and eugenics to address broad social issues. It doesn't work, obviously. It's horrifically inhumane, and frankly, it's below us as leftists. I'm sorry, I know I ramble, but I feel passionately about this. This is a deep misstep that leftists are making if they're abandoning this project, especially so soon.
I'm just kind of curious more emotionally, what is the sort of satisfaction you get when you remove the boogeyman of socialism from someone who has gotten the wrong ideas and has kind of gone down, you know, a bad path? Like, what does that do for you? Just from just getting the sort of satisfaction, you know, from the work you're putting into, and, you know, just the legacy you're leaving behind, all that kind of stuff.
Well, I think many of the basic arguments that you can use to advocate for socialism are fairly intuitively understandable. We live in, you know, a liberal. I'm American. You know, we live in a liberal democracy. We are at least nominally in favor of democracy as a guiding political principle. The idea of economic democracy follows naturally, and this is another bit of the rhetorical game as well. When people argue against you, when you frame things appropriately, they then argue against democracy itself. And you can extrapolate that. What other arguments would they have made? Would they have sided with, you know, King Henry back in the day? You know, would they have been calling for the execution of the patriots? No. You know, you can run down that road as far as you want. I think it's very satisfying to demystify a lot of this stuff because, and I especially see this in the left circles, a lot of people are oh, sorry, George, not Henry. I always get George and Henry mixed up. Those are the only two English kings that I remember.
Don't worry, I
It's
got
one of them's the Hamilton one, and the other one's the one who founded the English Protestant Church. And yeah, I always get them. Well, anyway,
I'm not right as being like he got his UK royal lineage is a disaster. Don't worry about it.
it's a point of pride as a socialist to not give a shit about the royal family. But yeah, I think oftentimes I think people on the left also aren't very confident in their understanding of these values because they argue for them in very abstract terms. Abstract political arguments aren't inherently bad, but the truly confident are able to plant their feet in the ground and say, yes, I want this exact thing. That's confidence right there, because then you're accountable for bad results. And oftentimes when people advocate for socialism, anarchism, communism, it's this flowery purple prose, this, I hope to live in an era where every man's labor is done but for the benefit of his own and those of his kin. All right, well, what the fuck does that mean? Give me a tax rate. Give me a number. People think that demystifies socialism, but that's the thing. I don't want socialism or communism or whatever else to be mystified. That's not the point of a political ideology, to be some kind of it's not Lord of the Rings lore, we're not reading up on this isn't the Silmarillion, there's no value in mystery here. All this stuff, when applied, communism, when applied, should be as rote and boring as any tax accountant's understanding of modern political systems. The point isn't to be interesting, it's to make people's lives better. So confidence in delivering these arguments, what will it make people's lives look like? How will it make people's lives better? Even if you have to demystify things, I would take that approach over anything else. And I think I've seen a lot of people responsive to that. I get a lot of emails and I see a lot of people in my chat, many of whom are watching right now, I assume, for whom socialism was kind of an abstract project in the past. And now it feels like some, reasonable thing. It's a thing that can be done. It's not some mystical, untried enigma. It could be done, and I think we can do it. I don't know if we will do it. Life's complicated, but I think we can.